In this video, I'm going to review what I've been nicknaming the Big Purple Beast. It's a custom mid-fat expedition gravel bike. Is it cool? Is it weird? Did I like it? Find out what I think in this video. Welcome back, Pathless Peddlers, and if you're new to the channel, if you are into the non-competitive side of cycling, riding party pace, you have found your people, hit that subscribe button. So the Mayhaw Gravel Expedition bike might be one of the more controversial bikes I've had on the channel. So if you missed it, I interviewed Mark Hall, the builder of the bike. He's based out in Eastern Washington, and we do a deep dive into the reasoning behind the geometry of the bike. So check out that video if you haven't seen it yet. But to give you cliff notes, this is where this bike fits in the gravel spectrum. So if you think of what we've come to know as the gravel bike, that kind of splits the difference between a road and a mountain bike. This bike splits that difference again between what we now call a gravel bike and a fat bike. So it's mid-fat, doesn't quite follow the trend of the modern mountain bike, which has a tucked rear end and super slack front end, but it's more of a capable beast than many of the gravel bikes out there that max out at 48 or 50 millimeter tire width. I'm just gonna throw it out there that this bike is not for everybody. It does serve a very specific niche. So if you're the type of cyclist that's gonna be doing multi-day bike packing trips where you need a little bit more width than a gravel or cyclocross bike can get you, say super sandy or rocky terrain, but you're also going to be riding mostly roads or hard packed, where something like a full-blown mountain bike or especially a fat bike will just drag you down, then this is a very particular niche bike for you. So I rode this bike in two modes. The first mode is what I'm going to be calling the praying mantis mode with this prototype handlebar from Ren, and also in drop bar gravel beast mode. So first, let's talk about this crazy handlebar. It is designed for multi-day bike packing. It gives you that width and mountain bike control, so you can really control the bike on the rough stuff. However, it also gives you plenty of arrowness in the front, so you can tuck in when you hit those long, flat, windy stretches in Wyoming on the Great Divide, as well as offering lots of places to mount a GPS, a light, or hang bags from. This bar is still in prototype mode, so there are things that may change. Currently, it's steel, so definitely a little bit on the portly side. If you want to learn more about this handlebar, I'll put a link below. It's not for sale yet. It's still a work in progress. Okay, so on to the next prototype thing on this bike, and it is this fork, which can take a mid-fat tire. Just like the handlebar, it was designed by Cameron from Renaissance Cyclists with help from Mark, and it's being produced by Ren. Lots of things are going to change from the fork that you see before you to its final production, but some interesting points is that it will have 3-pack mount, so yes, you can carry the stuffs on it. It's also supposed to have an interesting through axle insert system where you can run wheels with through axles that are both 12 and 15 millimeter in diameter. In terms of the rest of the bike, the wheels are by Astral, again, another US based company. Paul Clamper brakes in this beautiful shiny anodized purple, and big meats in the form of the Schwabel G1s in 2.8 with that tight knobby pattern. Cranks are by White Industries, and these beautiful purple pedals are by the brand Chromag. It's got the Cirrus Cycles Connect seat post and a surprisingly comfortable leather saddle from Gilles Berthoud. I'm going to be reviewing more of their saddles in the future, but suffice to say, I thought my days with a leather saddle were over. But I may go back to a leather saddle after trying this Gilles Berthoud. Moving to the rear of the bike, the drivetrain is SRAM Eagle, so lots of low. And lastly, you'll notice the longish rear end, which is definitely one of the defining features of this bike. The rear chainstay length in its most rearward position measures out to a pretty long 500 millimeter. Just to give you a frame of reference, most road bikes are 415 to 420, most all-rounders are 430, touring bikes are 450 or 460. This definitely goes further and beyond most production bikes you'll see out there on the market. In drop bar mode, I used the kitchen sink handlebar, which was once again a lifesaver from a fit perspective. Although I ride small frames, this bike a little bit too small. Brake levers were pretty no-nonsense long pull Tektros, so that's why they worked with the Paul Clampers, even though they were set up with the mountain bike braking arms. And the shifter was the ultralight, ultra cheap, ultra reliable micro shift bar end shifter. When I rode it in drop bar mode, I actually just set it to friction, and prior to this, I thought maybe 12 speed wouldn't work so well in friction mode, but turns out, guys, works awesome. So this bike on hour scales weighed in at about 28 to 27 pounds, depending on which handlebar configuration I was using, which is actually pretty dang good considering the heft of the leather saddle and the suspension seat post and the stainless steel handlebar. So not super ultralight components. You can definitely get this bike in the 25 or even sub 25 pound range if you were willing to spend the dollars. Just to give you a frame of reference, a Jones SWB that I reviewed previously, that was also a mid-fat tire, and that weighed in at about 32 pounds. So a lot portlier. Definitely felt the heft on the Jones. But on this bike, you know, it's not a featherweight road bike, but for the wheel and tire size and what the bike can do, I think it's pretty light. One of the unique selling points about the bike is the ultra long chainstay. Definitely a bit of an anomaly when you look at production bikes. Another thing of note is the front end trail. Mark was trying to get the trail to land in that upper 60s to low 70 range, which I actually like. I think that's where my Crust Bambora falls in. Less trail than a mountain bike, definitely more trail than say your endurance road or your cross bike. It's kind of splitting hairs once again. All that stuff is great in theory. How did the bike actually ride? So in both modes, riding on flat dirt or pavement, you know, the bike just rolled over everything. Definitely the big tires, maybe the long rear end added to an overall sense of comfort. It was like riding a Cadillac, basically. Think of it like a big purple Cadillac. On climbs, I think this is where things got really interesting. There's a lot of people that will argue whether a long or a short chainstay bike is a better climber. I think they climb different. For me, a short chainstay bike, you definitely feel the surges of every pedal stroke. With a long chainstay bike, especially like this, as you pedal, the bike is less surgy. It just kind of glides uphill. I don't know if it's faster, but it's definitely smoother. Where I thought the long rear end was detrimental was on really a kind of steep and loose and dry terrain, especially in drop bar mode. Standing and climbing, a lot of my weight was on the front of the bike, and it really unweighted the rear. And I found myself breaking traction in areas where I wouldn't typically break traction with a shorter chainstay bike. When using the mountain bike style handlebar, I could mitigate that because it was a little bit easier to shift my weight rearward. But on the drop bar, definitely a little bit more slippage in the rear. Another interesting thing I didn't expect is that although the geometric trail may have been in the low 70s, I think when you put in the big fat meat to add some pneumatic trail, it makes it feel higher trail than what the numbers would lead you to believe. I found that to be the case with this bike, especially when running really low pressures, let's say sub 20. The bike wanted to self-correct and it was fighting my steering inputs a bit, and it did give that sensation of higher wheel flop or drunken goatiness. Some of that went away when I put more air in the tires. That's kind of the weird thing about these tires. You'd think that you could drop them really low, but there's a definite floor to the tire pressure here. You go too low and it causes the bike to fight you. I felt the same thing with these tires on the Bear Claw Bo Jackson. Felt really high trailish to me too, and in retrospect, it might have been because of the tires actually. Jan Heine actually makes this point in his book, The All-Road Bicycle, or whatever it's called. Basically, short version, the wider the tire, if you want a more neutral feeling, you have to kind of undershoot the trail and make it lower than you would think to compensate for the pneumatic trail. So to me, the front end wasn't quite as neutral as I was hoping. I think the trail would probably have to be lowered, especially when you're running mid-fat tires. I think with a 29er tire, it would actually feel more neutral, but with this particular tire, it was a little bit in the higher trail arena for me, almost feeling like something in the 80s. Where this bike really shone was the downhill. Going downhill is where everything comes together with the long rear end, the mid-fat tires, the higher trail. Going down a gravel road or chunky double track, the bike just sailed through it. Felt super comfortable and stable. I definitely felt like I could let go of the brakes a little bit more because the bike felt more in control. So definitely an awesome descender. That might be its biggest strength. So hopefully I was able to describe the bike as accurately as possible. To be honest, I think if you're just riding the local grav and you aren't going on a big expedition into the unknown, then this might be too much a bike for you. Not to say that you can ride it at your local gravel race, but this honestly isn't what the bike was intended for. It's intended for things like the Great Divide, the Baja Divide, the White Rim Trail. So those routes which are mostly roads that can be really chunky, where a typical gravel bike that's based on road or cross bikes will feel undergunned, but are still primarily roads. With the mid-fat tire and the relative light weightness, you've got something that's gonna be a little bit more efficient than even a hardtail mountain bike, but does have the extra meats for when you encounter the chunk. I think one big pro is that I love that it's pushing the design. I do think we'll see more longer chainstay gravel bikes, if you will. I don't know if 500 is the right length. I'd probably pull it in a little bit, but definitely something to look for in the future. And probably the biggest pro of this bike for me is its descending capability. If I'm honest with myself, I'm probably a pretty mediocre climber and an even worse descender, so a bike like this would definitely compensate for my lack of confidence in descending without taking too much overall speed, factoring in the climbing. In terms of the cons, again, this bike is not for everybody. If you want a trail bike, this bike probably won't make you happy. And if you want a really short and tucked racy gravel bike, then again, this bike won't make you happy. It fills a very specific niche. Another con is that yes, it's gonna be spendy. It's made by a small maker based in the US with lots of US based components. You're gonna have to pay for those production costs and the living wages of US employees. Would I get one personally? I think it might be a little too much bike for most of the riding I do, but if I did have plans of doing a big trip like the Baja Divide or long stretches of the Great Divide, it would definitely be a bike I would consider. I think it's pretty unique, and I'm curious to see where this bike will go and if it will influence other bike makers in the future. We'll see. That's what I think. Let me know what you guys think about the Big Purple Beast in the comments below. I'm sure you have already. And if you like this content, don't forget to stop at the gift shop on your exit. It's like a museum. All those stickers, patches, and pins and postcards is what keeps this channel going, as well as our awesome Patreon supporters. Until next time, keep the supple side down.